Think the Bible is public domain and you can use any translation you want in your magnum opus commentary on the Bible? Think again. Today, we will talk about Bible licensing on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. New translations, old translations, transcriptions, revisions, and critical editions. We are surrounded by Bibles. And many Bible students think that they can just use any version they want of the Bible and then publish a book based upon that version. But if you don't do that legally, you can get an unexpected cease and desist notice from a publisher who has invested heavily in a printed line of Bibles. Now, the problem here is copyright. And I'm not an intellectual property lawyer. If you do need detailed advice on this, seek a qualified attorney. However, it's also well known that translations and special editions are copyrighted, and copyrights are owned by legal persons. And yes, faceless corporations are legal persons. So, in order to use substantial portions of a Bible translation or special edition in a book intended for sale, you have to meet the licensing requirements of the publisher. Now, the most obvious solution to sidestep this problem is to use a Bible which is already in the public domain. The King James Version, the American Standard Version, the Douay-Rheims, Webster Bible, and Young's Literal Translation have entered the public domain, and you can use those translations in whatever way you like. However, the problem is these older translations use archaic language that may not be familiar to a modern reader. They also tend to be based upon biblical scholarship that, quite frankly, is over 100 years old. So, oftentimes, it's not a great choice. On the other hand, some people go, oh, let's just use the original language. That can't be under copyright. Not so fast. Not just translations, but critical editions of the original text are also copyrightable, since they splice multiple transcriptions into a single edition. Now, you can get old editions of the Greek and Hebrew texts. For example, Scrivener's 1884 New Testament is an example of this. However, if you want to use the latest critical editions, you will normally need to get permission from the publisher. With all that said, many Bible translations state how much of a Bible edition you can use in the front matter. Let's look at some examples. The Christian Standard Bible, published by Holman, states that it, quote, may be quoted in any form up to and inclusive of 1,000 verses without the written permission of the publisher, provided that the verses quoted do not account for more than 50% of the work in which they are quoted, and provided that a complete work of the Bible is not quoted. Now, that's a pretty standard license statement. Now, what they mean by this is that you can't just say reprint 1,000 verses from the CSB without any commentary. That wouldn't be permitted. It also wouldn't be permitted that you could say, quote, a small book, like the Book of Ruth. You can't do that. They won't allow that either. So any like small book from the prophets would not, you can't quote the whole thing. At that point, you're going to have to seek permission from the publisher. Now, the NIV also has a license statement in the front of their edition, and they're published by the International Bible Society. Their license statements reads, quote, the NIV text may be quoted in any form, written, visual, electronic, or audio, up to and including 500 verses, without the express written permission of the publisher, provided the verses do not amount to a complete book of the Bible, nor do the verses quoted account for 25% or more of the total work in which they're quoted. So the standard for the good old NIV is a lot higher than, say, the CSB or the NASB. Now, in the case of the Net Bible, it doesn't have a license statement in the front. They pretty much say you got to go talk to the publisher immediately. Okay? So that's probably the strictest standard, where you're going to have to talk to the publisher directly right out of the gate. So there you have it, a little bit about license statements and their use in published works. We hope you found that interesting and you learned something. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.